I'm very grateful to the honourable member for Dundee East. I won't address his second point, he's addressed it thoroughly enough. But on the first, there are many areas in which we cooperate bilaterally with France, for example. The Lancaster House and Sandhurst agreements are just one of many examples.
Indeed, I think the honourable gentleman, however, understands the point I was making, that we don't want to find ourselves tied into ridiculous red lines and timetables when the objectives are the key thing. It's a pleasure, Madam Deputy Speaker, to take part in this debate on the gracious speech, and as with every Queen's speech or programme for government, there are, of course, certain measures one would welcome, not least in the case of this Queen's speech, the announcement to increase tax credits for research and development. And I say that because innovative economies are more productive economies. And when we come to combat the inevitable decline caused by Brexit, the more innovative and the more productive we can be, the better that will be. But a word of caution, research and development tax credits are a function of corporation tax, and not every innovative or innovating company, particularly small ones, pay corporation tax. So if we can have a little imagination from the Treasury bench about how we support innovation in smaller companies, that would be very welcome. I also welcome the announcement that measures will be developed to tackle hostile activity by foreign states, and I hope that builds upon some of the excellent work already done in the private and public sector, and essentially by the National Cyber Security Centre. I also note, although some of the measures to tackle climate change are very welcome, they are described as world-leading. They are very welcome measures, particularly from this government, but they're nothing of the kind when it comes to actually world-leading. The sad truth, Madam Deputy Speaker, is that this was quite a thin, quite poor programme for government. As my right honourable friend, the member for Ross, Skye and Lochaber, said in opposing the programme on the opening day of this debate, our party stands against the cruel, punishing policies and narrow, backward-gazing politics of this government. And I would actually go further. Some of the measures in this programme, an immigration bill which ends free movement of people in law, for example, will further diminish the UK's ability to attract the best and brightest and much-needed labour in other sectors, and very much risks turning the UK into an insular, reduced and backward-looking place. However, before we even address what the impact of ending free movement would be on agriculture, on hospitality, on the care sectors, before we even address the brain drain that the government's hostile environment is already causing, before we even address what some may say is the brutish logic of a Tory party whose plans will reduce the ability of young Scots, indeed youngsters from throughout these islands, to live, love, work and study freely throughout Europe, we might want to consider the practical implications of trade and how these matters are related. When Commission President von der Leyen said last week, without free movement of people, you cannot have free movement of capital, goods and services, the government should have listened. At a time when we need to boost trade, we should have paying attention to what damage this will do to the capital markets, to the City of London, to the ability to export services, all of which depend on people being able to travel freely. Because, of course, the damage to UK global trade which Brexit will cause, we should see a UK government now doing everything to remove every conceivable obstacle to protecting and to enhancing the opportunities to maintain and grow trade of all sorts. Free, fair trade with a level playing field. Instead, in spite now of the clearest of warnings, yet more obstacles are being erected, this time by ending free movement of people in law, which will further weaken and diminish the UK's ability to strike good trade deals to compensate for the losses and minimise the additional costs which Brexit will cause. And I think we should put a couple of numbers on this. Everybody knows there are dozens of economic assessments about Brexit. With one exception, they're universally negative. The National Institute assessment is pretty average. We could lose perhaps 20% of total global UK trade with a bad Brexit, and that's where we're heading. If we cut a deal with all the main English-speaking economies, if we cut a deal with all the BRICS countries, we might claw back 5 or 6% of that. Well, I will in just one moment. It doesn't take a genius to work out that we soon run out of large countries to cut deals with, to compensate, and adding additional obstacles strikes me as making no sense, and I'll happily give way.
We can give away. Focus do not say that we will lose trade. They simply say our rate of growth of trade will be slower. It does not say that trade will reduce.
Many assessments, I'm not going to go through them, trade will be reduced. Indeed, some of the assessments, as I have just said, suggest a loss of 20% of total global trade. This is quite extraordinary. At least, however, this programme for government does suggest there will be a trade bill, something, of course, we should already have had. And with a trade bill comes at least the opportunity to table amendments. Amendments to ensure full parliamentary oversight of trade deals, currently absent. Amendments to ensure that devolved nations' parliaments are consulted and consent to trade deals where there is a direct impact on those countries. Amendments to ensure that, as the UK rushes headlong into any deal offered, vital public services like the NHS are off the table, that important geographical indicators are protected, that vital regional industries, national industries in some cases, are protected like fishing. Many of us on these benches are old enough to remember the last time the Tories sold out Scottish fishing as expendable, and we have no confidence that they will not repeat the same mistake again. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, these things, parliamentary scrutiny, collective working to seek real agreement with the devolved nations, protecting the NHS, regionally important sectors, should be at the forefront of UK ministers' minds. But I fear they will, at best, be dragged kicking and screaming to make modest concessions, or worse, that the legitimate concerns of people and industries across these islands will be ignored in a headlong dash for what may be a rather hideous Tory-Trump deal. And when we think about the USA, when I was last there last year, I was repeatedly warned the UK will be expected to put everything on the table, and the US will be expected to put nothing on the table. So when the Secretary of State said in his remarks that a US-UK deal would be win-win, I was struck by the breathtaking naivety that a Secretary of State, a Foreign Secretary, would say something which bears absolutely no scrutiny. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, there's much to say. I will give way one more time.
Just attribute the advice that he was given, because I'd be very interested to know who thinks that the negotiation will be quite so asymmetric.
I won't attribute.
Just before the honourable gentleman comes back in, a reminder that if we're not going to put a time limit on, we do need colleagues to stick to approximately 10 minutes. Stuart Hosey.
I won't attribute that. That would be completely unfair. But I can assure the honourable gentleman that that warning was given to me on more than one occasion. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I will take what you're saying and miss out a chunk on the trade bill, which we can do when it's finally published. Other than to say one thing, the UK government have said that the main elements of the trade bill will be to create powers so that the UK can transition trade agreements we are party to through a membership of the EU, ensuring continuity for business. So far, so good. The problem, Madam Deputy Speaker, is that this government couldn't even roll over in full the agreements we had with Norway and Switzerland. A Tory government unable or incapable of replicating agreements we had with two close, relatively small, Western-friendly neighbours. Yet they expect a simple piece of domestic legislation will pave the way to quickly and easily replicate some of the larger, more complicated deals the UK has. If that's what they truly believe, we're no longer dealing with reality, but with the politics of delusion. I'm going to end by what the Secretary of State said at the beginning. I think he was wrong. He said the UK post-Brexit would have expanded global horizons. The truth is that this programme for government, a trade bill which may give too much power to the executive, an immigration bill that will end freedom of movement, it will lead to a weakened, diminished, reduced UK. Shrinking horizons, not expanded global horizons. And from our point of view, we will oppose this measure, we will oppose this programme for government, and the sooner we're out of this United Kingdom and this backward-looking politics, the better for us all.
Hear, hear.
Alex Shelbrooke.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it is indeed a pleasure to be following on these benches my honourable friend for Stafford with a very uplifting, upbeat and excellent maiden speech, and I congratulate her. And have to say, Madam Deputy Speaker, is that I stand here today as in one of the most exciting moments of my career, and I really think that there's so much to be positive, better than the morose dirge we've just had from the member for Dundee East. But I view this new decade with the potential of the 1980s and how this country moved so forward in that decade. But of course, because of the economic policies we've had to put in place in the last 10 years, at least we start this decade in strong economic circumstances. And I feel there's so much we can exploit. I honestly think this is the decade of reward, that this will be the decade of change, and this will be the decade to make us the lead in the 21st century around the world. Now, we are moving towards a high-tech, high-wage, high-growth, high-productivity economy. That's not there at this moment in time. But this Queen's speech and what's been laid out in the programme for government shows that with the policies the Prime Minister wants to take forward in his government, that those things can be achieved, and they can be achieved in this first term. And they can be achieved with the ambition, and not least because we have the economic strength behind us to take it forward. Today, quite rightly, this conversation and this debate is facing on some of those key foreign affair and defence issues that put our place in the world and how we operate into those, and I'll come on to a couple of those. But we must also look at the United Kingdom's place in the world and what the United Kingdom can achieve. And the infrastructure plans that we have, I'll come on to a bit later, are very important to achieve that. I think the 20s, therefore, will be the decade of healing and growth in all areas, from defence to infrastructure to the economy and democracy. And I want to come on to democracy, Madam Deputy Speaker, about our place in the world, because the last 5 years, and even since the general election, we've still heard people who want to ignore democratic outcomes. And if this general election, more than any general election showed, is that above all else, the British people are Democrats. And I was struck from the moment we had the vote on Europe in 2016, that those who voted Remain, on the whole, felt that the decision should be honoured. They may not have liked the result, but they felt the decision should be honoured because people are fundamentally Democrat. And there's been this habit, and it's not just about the Brexit debate, there's been this habit to ignore democratic results across the world. Look at the backlash in this country against the election of President Trump, democratically elected in one of our closest allies. Look at the behaviour of the previous Speaker in that chair, who rolled out the red carpet for dictators and autocrats and then refused entry to the democratic elected leader of our closest ally in NATO. A disgraceful and small-minded activity that again played into ignoring democratic outcomes. And if we are to lead the world and to have our place in the world, number one, we must respect democracy. Whether we like those outcomes or not, we must respect democracy. And that has been sadly lacking in so many ways, mainly led from those benches over there. I give way to my honourable friend.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. He's making an extremely important point. And does he agree with me that much of the frightening rise
of extremist elements that we've seen, particularly in France and the Netherlands, can be traced back to the way that their governments through the 1990s ignored clear decisions that their electorates had taken in referenda, particularly around Europe.
I'm most grateful to my honourable friend, and actually I'd say that that actually is as relevant today. And in fact, you're seeing a rise of extremist parties across Europe, whether it be Vox in Spain, the Swedish Democrats, all these people who have a very questionable past of where they're coming from, based on the fact that you've got populaces who feel that their national government is not taking notice of the demands they are making. And in many ways, Brexit was the pressure valve for us. You know, it allowed people to vent their fury at where they thought things were going to be ignored on without having to move to extreme parties. And I think that we should be grateful in this country for that. Because, you know, the reality is, Madam Deputy Speaker, is that we've just seen an election where extremist views have been rejected. The policies of the Right Honourable Gentleman, the Leader for the Opposition, when he threatened to shut down elements of the press, because if he didn't like what they did, he did a video saying, "Change is coming, you'll all be sorry." It was unacceptable. It's not democratic. You may not like what the press say all the time, but you cannot have a free and open society unless you have a free and open press. And that's something which we have to put around. And if we do disagree with what's in the press, it is up to us to argue as to why we think that's wrong and prove our point. I'm careful of the time, Madam Deputy Speaker, but I would say this. It's all very well for the Honourable Lady from Islington South and Finsbury to criticise the relationships that this government has with partners around the world and to draw on Yemen. But not once did I hear her lay any of the blame at the Iranian regime, who have been arming the Houthi rebels and launching missiles into Riyadh in deliberately provocative terms. And I have to say, in all of the events of the last week, that lack of willingness to come out against the Iranians and what they've been up to shows that they may be able to change their leader, but in the words of the Who, meet the new boss, same as the old boss. So I do come on to defence, Madam Deputy Speaker, because freedom is important and we must make sure we can defend it. But as my honourable friend for New Forest East said, deterrent is equally important. And as I said to the Secretary of State for Defence last week about the possibility of a NATO-led maritime force in the Straits of Hormuz to act as deterrent rather than reaction to attack, what we have to do is make sure that we've got the ability to react to these things. And I make no apology, and when the Defence Review comes up, that we must have another proper look at the Royal Navy. I think that it was a mistake to only deliver 6 of the 12 destroyers. In fact, those other 6 destroyers would not have cost half as much to make as the original 6 because it was all in the programme. We've got a good frigate programme, but I think we need more. We should be looking at more minesweepers, a very flexible and versatile ship which can be used either to patrol our waters or go and help in problem areas. Lots of people criticise the amount of money spent on aircraft carriers. It'll be controversial. I'd have another one because I quite frankly think that the ability to have your aircraft platforms in several different areas is important. Because as my honourable friend from New Forest East, and I always appreciate the work he does, it's very in-depth, says you don't know where the threats are going to be coming from. But what we do know, when we can't react and we can't work towards it, you allow those things to perhaps run out of control because you haven't got the counterbalances and you haven't got the deterrent. But I will say this, and I agree with Dominic Cummings when he says there is a major problem in procurement in the Ministry of Defence. We read only this weekend that the Trident replacement's already 1.3 billion overspent. How does this happen? How can we possibly be trying to build up our armed forces and build up more ships and personnel that we need when we can't even get a project which is hardly underway and we're already out by billions? You know, that does need fundamental review and fundamental looking at. But we must also work out how we're going to man all of this and how we're going to recruit, because it's all very well building ships, but we have a recruitment problem, which has always traditionally been hard in times of full employment. I'll just briefly mention infrastructure because it is important and it will help cement our place in the world. If we want to have that high-tech economy, we have to build for it. We have to make sure the fibre broadband goes in. We have to work on the transport solutions. We have to be honest and say that if a solution doesn't look like it's going to deliver what it should deliver or the price is going up, then there must be other ways to deliver that solution. And that needs to be looked at. I still want HS2 to come to my city of Leeds. I think it's absolutely vital for my city of Leeds. But whether it does that by going to Manchester and looping onto HS3 and coming that way, I am open to suggestion. But at the moment, I'm finding it very hard to see how the price tag, almost double what we were told and led to believe in this House, can actually deliver the benefits we're looking for, and especially when there are ways with the Prime Minister's agenda that it can be delivered to my city of Leeds, and I do think that's very important. But I, Madam Deputy Speaker, am an optimist. And I'm very excited about this one nation agenda that has been put forward in this Queen's speech. I honestly believe that the reason this will be a fantastic decade is because of the strength of the One Nation agenda. It won't be the roaring 20s we're talking about, Madam Deputy Speaker. We will be looking back at this period as the start of the roaring 21st century. Thank you.
Kate Osmore.
Madam Deputy Speaker. It is an honour to add my voice to this really important debate, and it has been a pleasure to hear from new members giving their maiden speech. The member for Stafford, who I have worked with before she took her place in this House, and I look forward to working with you, holding on and being an advocate for the International Development Department. And also the member who's no longer here for St Albans. Her constituency is 25 miles away from Edmonton, my constituency, so maybe I can join in one of these pub crawls and bring some of my constituents along with me. Madam Deputy Speaker, it's safe to say this parliamentary term will be a crucial parliament for Britain's role in the world. It is much more than the question of whether and how we leave the European Union. It is about who we are. It is about the fork in the road that we face. Does Britain want to become a mean, introspective, protectionist island that clings on only to the imagined greatness of some past empire that was powered by racism and exploitation? Or does Britain want to become a beacon in the modern world for global justice, for international human rights, and for tackling climate change, inequality, and the refugee crisis? Madam Deputy Speaker, alongside the legislative programme put forward by this government, there are important points of policy. The UK must continue to spend 0.7% of its gross national income on international development priorities. In fact, I hoped that this Parliament may in due course debate increasing that to 1% to free up extra funding for climate finance to help the Global South survive the climate emergency. So too must the UK protect the independence of this world-class Department for International Development. The department must not become subservient to another, and we must end the civil service recruitment freeze to bring in badly needed staff to manage the aid budget properly. Madam Deputy Speaker, this debate is also about what Britain chooses to stand for and about its politics. The world is increasingly polarised. On one side sits Putin, Orban, Modi, Bolsonaro, Trump, and the rest of Steve Bannon's dream of a fragmented new world order. On their side, they reject the rules, the international law, the universal human rights that have taken decades for the world to establish. On their side, Trump takes the world backwards on climate change and women's reproductive rights, decrees invasions on Twitter, and insults the world's poorest for living in what he calls, and I quote, shithole countries. Theirs is the side of an engineered chaos, of injustice, and of ever-widening inequality. But on the other side stands hope and an international order that is strong and stable, and that could even become fair. Imagine a new economics that could work for the planet and the people, and a world that actually brings people together to solve our biggest challenges, like inequality and the climate breakdown. Madam Deputy Speaker, that is the side that the UK must pick each and every time. But I and many others on this side of the House are worried that this current government will just keep picking the wrong side. And the truth is, what we have seen of this current government in the last Parliament is a Prime Minister who has already made his choice, and that is to take his place in Steve Bannon's New World Order. So as this new Parliament commences, it will be up to us in this House as members to chart a better way forward for Britain, whether inside or outside the European Union. And so, Madam Deputy Speaker, I will end my speech by making 3 simple pleas to members on all sides of this House. Firstly, we do not let the Prime Minister and his extremist factions take Britain off the cliff. Secondly, we do not let the Prime Minister side with dictators and populists when it comes to the crunch. Thirdly, we do not let the Prime Minister pick the wrong side of history. Instead, let us all hold him to account by consistently speaking up for global justice throughout this Parliament. Thank you.
It's a great pleasure to call Imran Ahmed Khan to make his maiden speech.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's with great pleasure and some humility that I rise to make this my maiden speech. I have found the House to be a welcoming place that I am proud to be part of. Over the last month, I have at times been awestruck by the kindness, helpfulness, and near encyclopedic knowledge of the wonderful staff who serve this place and whom I find this palace's greatest treasure trove. I especially wish to thank my constituency neighbour, my honourable friend for Morley and Outwood, and her team, who have been a great support to me over the last 2 months. I wish to say what a pleasure it is to be part of such a vibrant and dynamic pack of Yorkshire MPs. Indeed, my neighbour from Rothwell and Elmet came and helped me a great deal. In his infancy, he contested Wakefield, and he gave me a lot of his advice, and indeed his shoe leather. Speaking of shoe leather, I'm mindful of all those who've graced this green leather, and I have confidence that we'll step up and meet the challenges promised by this privilege of public service. I'm also aware of the energy and emotion that this House and the people whom it serves have invested into the Brexit debate. The underlying theme of unleashing our United Kingdom's potential to innovate, adapt, overcome and triumph are not lost in the character of my constituency of Wakefield. Madam Deputy Speaker, as Britain does indeed renew and consolidate her place in the world, I can't think of anywhere else more important to be than here, helping that happen now. Britain has still to play up and play the game, improving the world and enhancing our place in it. As an Ahmadi Muslim belonging to a peace-loving minority community that suffers vicious persecution, discrimination and oppression in many parts of the world, I see perhaps more clearly than most the deep and enduring importance of core British values such as compassion, tolerance and fairness, especially at a time when those values are perceived as under threat in many parts of our world. We must continue to be a beacon of thoughtful, respected and innovative thinking, born of years of accumulated learning and practice. Before I launch into the rich history of Wakefield, one with which my own family story is intertwined, I want to pay tribute to my predecessor. In 2005, Mary Cree became the first woman elected to represent Wakefield, a tenure that was to last for 14 years. I'm not sure if the House is aware, but before Mary and I first met, she propelled me to new heights, approximately 13,000 feet. On a bright November morning last year, after reading Mary's comments in the Yorkshire Post about her incoming Tory opponent being parachuted in, I put the protestations of my friends and family aside and performed a parachute jump. This hadn't been on any bucket list of mine, but definitely got the adrenaline flowing. So thank you, Mary. Later that day, with my feet firmly on the ground, I met Mary for the first time. We were both appearing on a BBC Radio Leeds drive time debate. I turned up still resplendent in my true blue jumpsuit. Mary accepted this with good grace, and during this first encounter, set out her stall as a calm, concise, and experienced advocate. That first meeting was in one of Wakefield's many good schools, Queen Elizabeth's Grammar School. It was Craig's, where my eldest brother went to school, and arch rival to my own alma mater, Silcoats. Craig's is an independent school that has actively championed and supported its local state sector rivals, including the outstanding Pontefract College, and was a willing participant in the Assisted Places scheme. As the programme came to an end, the pupils in the audience immediately gravitated toward Mary. This was an example of the interest and affection that many constituents in Wakefield have for her. I, like Mary, contend with a hearing impairment, something she referenced in her own maiden speech in this House. Wakefield has, within its dynamic business community, a company that is currently accessing research funding to investigate tinnitus, a hearing condition that currently over 1 million GP referrals each year. This project has multiple international partners including industry, government, and academia. I would also like to pay special tribute to Mary's time and contribution whilst working on overseas aid and development. This resonates with me a lot due to my previous work at the United Nations and elsewhere abroad. Our overseas aid and development is testament to British compassion, and it can be leveraged as a powerful agent for and a real measure of Britain's reach and influence around the world. Mary was a public servant, and I hope she's able to continue her work in other places. Wakefield is fortunate to have had such a worthy Member of Parliament. Madam Deputy Speaker, whilst I conclude my comments about my predecessor, may I direct the thoughts of the House to the sad news of the death of His Majesty Sultan Qaboos of Oman. Through the Sultan, Oman has been an ally of Britain since 1970, in a part of the world where there are definite fault lines. His kingdom looked to us for guidance and friendship. In return, Oman has been a friend to Britain, and I hope will continue to represent the greater aspects of the United Kingdom's place in the world. Madam Deputy Speaker, I was born in Wakefield. I attended school in Wakefield. My late father, a dermatologist, practiced medicine in Wakefield, spending his entire working life in the NHS. This led to him to meet my mother, a nurse at Wakefield's Pinderfields Hospital. My nana was a night sister there. It's fair to say that I was quite literally owe my entire existence to the NHS and to Wakefield. I feel the warm glow of history when I tell you that, according to my mother, my grandfather, Wilfred Benjamin Reynolds, was the boys' brigade leader for the father of the Honourable Member for Hemsworth. I look forward to working with my constituency neighbour and having meetings with him, although I don't expect we'll be wearing shorts, playing conkers, or drinking cocoa around the campfire. Gaining city status in 1888, Wakefield has many claims to fame. The cruise ship-loving singer, Jane MacDonald, and the 1980s band Black Lace hail from Wakefield. Many members may have danced to one of their memorable singing songs, such as Agadoo, at a wedding party or wedding... Edward... Clearly I have. Edward the Confessor had an estate in Wakefield hundreds of years after it was first settled by the Anglo-Saxons and Vikings. In J.S. Fletcher's Nooks and Corners of Yorkshire, a very good read, he describes Wakefield as the principal town along the banks of the Calder and has figured in history to no small extent. Indeed, it is just over 560 years ago to the day, on December 30th, 1460, that Richard Neville, Duke of York, and his son Thomas met their deaths at the Battle of Wakefield. The Lancastrians, led by Lord Clifford, defeated the Yorkists to suffer a major reverse months later at Britain's bloodiest battle, Towton, a site just down the road. Wakefield became yet another battlefield almost 200 years later, during the English Civil War, when the parliamentarian forces fought an engagement with the Royalists. Although, Madam Deputy Speaker, I now find myself a parliamentarian, although I confess to you to always having sympathised in the round with Cavaliers. According to an Old English ballad, Wakefield can also claim fame as the location for some of Robin Hood's shenanigans. It was at Stanley, later part of Wakefield's deep historical roots to the coal mining industry, that Robin and his band of freebooters had their infamous encounter with the Pindar of Wakefield. The Pindar was a nominated townsman of Wakefield who went toe-to-toe with Robin and his merry men after they goaded him by trespassing with stray animals on Wakefield land. Robin was so impressed by the Pindar's nerve and prowess that he invited him to join his outlaw band. Madam Deputy Speaker, this may be a legend, but it aptly captures some of the characteristics of the proud, honest, and plain-speaking constituents of Wakefield, and their continued willingness to fight for their rights. I would humbly submit that when you come to visit our city, you keep your flock of geese under control, or maybe consider leaving them at home. The Wakefield area is the traditional home of the headquarters of West Yorkshire Police, one of Britain's largest police forces. West Yorkshire Police, with their regional, national and international partners, have played a major role in counter-terrorism policing since the 7/7 attacks of 2005. The former Assistant Chief Constable, John Parkinson, was an early leader of the then North East Counter-Terrorism Unit and a thought leader in formulating and codifying the contest strategy, a key framework in UK counter-terrorism practice, keeping our communities safe and countering the radicalisation of the vulnerable. For the United Kingdom and her status in the world, in terms of capability, they represent the very best, alongside our gallant armed forces, superb intelligence services, agencies, and our universally admired diplomats. These capabilities are respected and studied by a broad base of our international partners, involved in the evolving, ongoing fight against terrorism and organised crime. Other famous people from Wakefield include John Ratcliffe, founder of the Ratcliffe Library in Oxford, Richard Fleming, founder of Lincoln College, Oxford. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, forgive me, Wakefield has a link to education. It is on this point I wish to highlight a large number of young people in my constituency for whom equality of opportunity needs to be made real, more than just fine-sounding words. There are still too many young people from disadvantaged backgrounds in no employment, education or training. I look forward to working with Her Majesty's dynamic government, and whenever they are willing, the benches opposite, to support the creation of new jobs and opportunities to improve the lives of people who deserve more attention and greater fairness than they have had in the past. This will not come just by saturating our northern towns and cities facing similar circumstances with concrete, cranes and porter cabins, but by delivering excellent education and training. The self-esteem that comes from earning the contents of a pay packet lifts people up and in turn brings the aspiration of owning a home. Madam Deputy Speaker, I have already mentioned the company investigating a treatment framework for tinnitus, but my constituency and the wider business community has within it companies involved heavily in fields that may surprise some members. There's a company working on supercomputer-generated models for predicting adverse weather patterns. After the recent floodings in our region, my constituency neighbours, the Right Honourable and Honourable Members for Doncaster North, Don Valley and Barnsley Central, may well welcome the positive outcomes of this work. There are also companies that are pioneering and improving new methods of high-tech manufacturing and recycling harmful plastics. I want to see these companies thrive, not only with their spirit of innovation, but also by employing skilled young people born and educated in the local area. During my campaign, I heard the voices of hard-working parents who want the best for the most important thing in their lives, their children. I want to help carry the torch already lit by the individuals and organisations in my constituency to foster confidence, aspiration and achievement. Madam Deputy Speaker, when members of this House have need for a tranquil place for quiet reflection in which to think about their choices, maybe for leadership, and decide, I would recommend a visit to the Yorkshire Sculpture Park, a real gem, not only of my constituency, but of God's own country. There they may find peace of mind and enhanced perspective, whilst appreciating the beautiful sculptures of Barbara Hepworth, Anthony Gormley and Henry Moore. There is one further individual I would like to mention, a great patriotic son of Yorkshire and a true servant of Wakefield, who, when asked in this place to speak for England, lent his voice and vote to the fight against tyranny, the Right Honourable Arthur Greenwood. Until the recent election, the last Conservative to return to this place by the people of Wakefield was a surgeon called George Hillman in 1931. Sadly, Hillman died that same year, and in the ensuing election of 32, Arthur Greenwood was elected, and that marked a continuous chain of Labour representation for Wakefield here, broken only 1 month ago today. My predecessor, Arthur, was the MP for Wakefield during the Second World War, and he served in the Inner War Cabinet, where he played a decisive role. In 1940, when Europe and East Asia were smouldering, and the only guns left sounding in defiant support of freedom were British, there existed a plurality of voices in this cabinet of 5. Those with Churchill and the continued prosecution of the war, and others who thought that Britain was too weak and diminished to go it alone in the world. It was this camp which wished to sue Hitler's inhuman project for peace that seemed to have the numbers in cabinet. Faced with surrendering to the most villainous and malevolent powers, it was the deciding vote from Greenwood, and indeed therefore Wakefield, that sided with Churchill and informed the nation and our enemies that Britain would never surrender. The rest, as they say, is history. However, history sometimes provides parallels, and when faced again with the prospect of capitulation, in the spirit of Arthur Greenwood, much of what had been taken for granted as the traditional Labour vote up and down the country came out and entrusted a Conservative Prime Minister once again not to bend, bow or buckle. I will do my best, as I am certain so too will my newly elected honourable friends, not only from across Yorkshire and the North, but from all parts of our United Kingdom.